Now we will continue phase 3 by turning our attention to the neck, because this has a lot of complex structure that will benefit from the same planar approach that we applied to the face. And the first thing I want to do is bring down the front of the neck so that the connection from neck to shoulders is actually an angle. So if we look from the side, it's a common misconception that you'll see a simple cylindrical neck transition into the shoulders in a parallel angle. For example, a lot of people, myself included when I first started, think that the neck comes down at this angle and connects at a perpendicular 90-degree angle. And that's not the case. In fact, the angle is actually pretty steep from the collarbone in the front to the top edge of the trapezius. And so by bringing down the front of the neck, we can introduce that angle early on. So I'm just going to continue around the sides, making sure that from the front and the side, we have an angle. Fairly steep angle, keep in mind. Now that's already reading a little bit better. Also, the very front of the neck comes down to more of a peak than a rounded shape. So I'm going to introduce that a bit as well. Next, we're going to hint at a collarbone, which is on the front edge of our bust here. And with the clay strips brush, I'm just going to build up a simple shelf. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to pinch the bottom of the bust because so far it has this thickness to it. And I really just want it to be kind of straight and sharp. And then everything below this edge, I will simply flatten out with the scrape and smooth brushes. There we go. That shelf just felt a little bit odd to me. All right, now I kind of have to rebuild that collarbone structure. That's not a big deal. Again, clay strips brush, just building up broad strokes until we have a nice shelf. Maybe smooth it back. There we go. And then to continue with this structure, I'm going to grab my Draw Sharp brush, and we're going to cut in a valley about a quarter of the way back, and I mean a quarter of the neck diameter. So let's just draw a couple hash marks here and here. We split that in half, and then in half again, we have the front quarter, and we're just going to draw a line like this. Maybe switch the color of my annotation to be a bright orange or something. There we go. And so with my Draw Sharp brush, I'm going to hold Control. Fairly large brush. Again, my strength sits around 0.3 usually. And let's make the fall off linear to begin with. I'm going to push that in. Okay, then I'll switch over to the sharp fall off, the sharper fall off, and just make that a nice tight crease. Okay, so now we're going to connect the flat plane of our collarbone with the side of the valley that we just cut. There we go. And then on the top side, we don't want this kind of shape right here. We actually want it to be pretty flat. So with our scrape brush, we can plane that away. It also will help to move that angle, that corner down so that it's flat. Now we can plane it away pretty easily. And this valley is a simplification of the transition from trapezius to the collarbone. So if we switch over to our anatomic model, you can see here that all the muscles in the neck, or at least the main ones that we'll be focusing on, closest to the skin, wrap and crisscross through the neck and connect to the clavicle. So there ends up being a valley right along that connection. And so that's what we are simplifying with this valley. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good so far. The next step is to create a tube structure that's representative of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. So if we switch back to our anatomic model, that is this cylindrical shape right here. It connects from the back of the ear, and then it kind of wraps around, but more at a straight angle, then connects to the knob of the clavicle. And it actually is one muscle, but it splits at the end into the sternal head and the clavicular head. And while we're not going to split that shape in our simplification, we're going to keep it one shape, but it's important that the external contour is straight up and down from the connection to the clavicle up into the bottom of the chin. So keep that in mind as we create this structure. We'll switch back, and then with the clay tubes brush, clay strips, we're going to be creating a tube structure. We're going to start from the back of the neck, and like we did for the clavicle, we're going to build this structure up. And let's make sure that I have dynamic topology enabled with subdivide collapse so that our geometry stays even. We're not committing to any fine details yet. But as far as the thickness of this strip, I'm kind of imagining the angle that we implied with this shape and then make a perpendicular line from the bottom of the ear down about like this. And I'm going to make the tube about 50% of that. 50, maybe 60%, somewhere in there. So back to the clay strips, keeping in mind the thickness of this shape. I don't want to make it too thick, nor do I want to make it too thin. And in all honesty, this part of the neck has been a challenge for me ever since I got into heads, because it just seemed that the neck is so cylindrical, but actually there are some very unique shapes that contribute to an overall cylindrical shape, but the actual components of which are not really cylindrical. And so it was difficult in the beginning to understand the sternocleidomastoid muscle, but hopefully with this method, it won't be so tough for you. All right, so we've got the mass blocked out. I'm gonna look from my front view. And since our beginning shape was a cylinder, it kind of looks like we just attached this mass to the outside of the cylinder, which does not look like the organic neck we're after. And the problem is we need to bring in this shape so it's less of a wrap around the cylindrical neck and it's more of a straight line. So right now we've got more of a curve like this, whereas we want it to be straight like this. So with my grab brush, with a wide radius, the valley that we've created, but also part of the neck here, and I'll show you why. And we'll move that all into more of a straight direction from the bottom of the chin here. I'm sorry, the jaw, I mean. So we have a nice triangular shape, which is called the anterior triangle. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. Let me double check. Right, yeah, so on the skin, this triangle that's formed. And by making our grab brush radius big, we've moved away from an overly cylindrical neck, and now we're starting to form a couple ridges here at the front. And we want to continue that into a straight up and down column. So I'm going to grab my draw sharp brush and draw a couple subtle lines and then pinch them together. All right, this is the kind of column that we want to create. Reinforce the valleys that we've already established. Also cut in a little bit more sharp in between the jaw and the neck. Pinch those together. There we go. Nice and faceted. Okay, so in the middle, I'm sorry, not the middle of the column, but actually the first quarter again. So we're going to draw a line, hash mark at the bottom, hash mark at the top, split in half again. Right here, I'm going to use my draw sharp brush and actually push out a little bit. Okay, so let's, with my sharp fall off, let's make it a big brush radius and push that out a little bit. This is going to represent the Adam's apple. Now, it looked a lot sharper from the front, but from the side, you can see it's barely poking out. We're just going to use our grab brush, pull out the peak, and then flatten the contours from the peak to the other ends of the contour. Okay, so from the bottom and top, we're going to push that in, make sure that we have a nice straight angle. And so this juxtaposition of shapes is very important for a believable neck, where we have the sternocleidomastoid at this angle from top to bottom, right to left, and then the front of the neck, top to bottom, left to right. And if the neck doesn't have some semblance of these shapes, it's just not going to look right. So that looks good for the front of the neck, but our sternocleidomastoid is not looking as polished as everything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw an annotation line down the middle of the tube, about like this, where it kind of curves off at the end. And I'm going to use my smooth brush to simply smooth on the left side of that line, and then smooth on the right side of that line. Now my line's not perfect, so I'm not matching it 100%, but you hopefully get the idea. And then when we turn that annotation off, smoothing on either side of the line leaves a ridge for us to pinch. And this helps to establish the volume and contour of the sternocleidomastoid. I really wish that had a shorter name because it's kind of hard to say correctly every single time. But I actually like the ridge that's forming here, so I'm going to keep it and emphasize it just a little bit more. I wasn't planning on that, but it kind of was a happy accident. All right, now if we look from the front, remember, if we switch over to our anatomic model, where the clavicular head splits off from the sternal head, the silhouette of this muscle is pretty much straight up and down. And so we can apply that to this simplified planar shape. And I just want to pull out this edge to be fairly straight. And again, this is an oversimplification of the shapes, but I think it really helps to keep them simple if this is your first time forming them or you're trying to get a better grasp at how to form them. We will, of course, smooth all this out in time, and it will, in the end, be very organic. But that structure is looking really nice. Just make sure to keep everything else nice and planar as well. And another good part about the planar structure is that you can orbit around our contours, our ridges and our edges, and you can see where the kinks are a little better. Like right here, you see how the edge, whoops, so I need to turn on the annotation, but you can see how the edge kind of kinks inward and then back outward, whereas we want it to be nice and straight. Whereas if this was all organic, it would be a little more difficult to tell that kind of silhouette. I think that looks good. And the last structure we need to implement is the trapezius. So real quick, we'll take a look at that muscle. And this one tends to surprise me with how large it is. Just a very big L shape connecting the back of the head downward and then outward until it wraps around and connects to the clavicle. But it tends to surprise me given that all these other muscles are so much smaller and tightly packed. And then we got this huge trapezius on the backside. But practically speaking, it's just a large L shape. At least the half of it is an L shape. Of course, we get the same thing on the other side. So let's start building that out. Once again, with the clay strips brush, and I'm going to just begin stroking some columns on either side of the back of the neck. I'm going to leave a little space in the middle for a little ridge, not a ridge, a little valley. And we're going to continue that downward, straight down the spine. And then now we'll curve off into, from this side, a backwards L, and just kind of wrap this around. And keep in mind that I'm really not trying to affect so much of the volume of this shape because we kind of blocked out the volume initially. I really just want to outline the structure. The more we grow the volume, the more muscular this person will look. And I'm not going for a particularly muscular person, more of a generic fit person, I suppose. And so with this blocked out, similar to the sternocleidomastoid, I'm going to draw a line basically in the center. I need to turn on the annotation. Let's also remove the existing lines. Try this again. I'm going to draw a line basically down the center and then down the center as it spreads out, okay? So we're trying to keep equal distance on this side as well as this side. All right, and we're gonna use that smooth trick to smooth on either side of our line, which will leave us with a nice ridge that helps us in the planarization of these shapes. All right, so we're just gonna continue smoothing this out. Here we go, we're left with a ridge here in the center. Maybe emphasize that a little bit more with a draw sharp brush. Turn off the annotation so we can see what it really looks like. There we go, not too bad. And actually, this kind of needs to be reversed. So instead of sticking out as a ridge, let's actually push it inward. Not obsess too much over it because we will definitely spend more time on that as we turn it into the final shape. And then I want one more ridge on the front side. Okay, so this angle as it kind of hooks around the shoulder and connects to the clavicle. You know, we're not actually seeing the connection necessarily, but implying that that's the direction it's going. And that's pretty good. We're left with a triangle shape here, also here, and this one, which we already went over. All right, so this is the anterior triangle, this is the posterior triangle, and this one I'm not sure has a name. But these are the shapes that we're after. Let's take a look at it. And the only other thing I want to do is bring up the angle of the trapezius a bit. We want this to be straight, whereas right now we've got a pretty swooping S-curve. So I'm going to bring up the back side and then straighten that out. All right, that's going to look more natural. Maybe bring it up a little bit more. There we go. And our neck is possibly, just by looking at it, a little bit on the long side, maybe. Not an unrealistic long, but in the spectrum of human heads, I would say just slightly long. And another thing that I like to do is just cut a sharper line, sharper valley to emphasize the bottom of the occipital bone. And with the trapezius connection, I don't really want this. Okay, I want it to be more like that. There we go. That's a little bit better. Oh, and then this one, I need to polish that. And one thing that I did forget to do in the last video with the back of the head is it's still left over as being very spherical, and that's not really the shape of the skull. Usually it's a little bit elongated. So with a large grab brush, I'm just going to pull that up a little bit. There we go. That's a more believable skull shape. And at this point, we are done blocking out the planes of our human bust. And the next goal for us is to focus on each part of the head and neck and move from planar simplified shapes into the final organic structure.